Kelly Emerson here for ESPN Boston High Schools with Brendan Hall and Scott Barboza for your 2014 football preview. Guys, let's jump right into the Xaverian topic. The Hawks, led by Joe Gaziano, will be regarded as one of the state's top defenses. What will be the key to their success?
I think for them, with the offense that they've typically run, they like to run the ball a lot. They're going to have to score early, get up on teams early. The defense, we know, is going to hold its own, with Gaziano obviously leading the way, returning Defensive Player of the Year in their secondary there. But you look at the backfield there with Kenny Kern, Noah Sorrento, and DeAndre Holmes to an extent. I think they're going to have to pound the ball early and get up and let the defense do what they do best.
I'm looking at the quarterback, Jake Farrell. Obviously had I think a pretty good season last year, but I think Charlie Stevenson, some of his quarterbacks, he likes to bring them along incrementally. Obviously, Jake, first year, full-time starter last year. I want to see if there's any wrinkles that they add to this playbook. We saw last year against Central Catholic. Obviously, I think if they had a full complement of running backs coming into that game, things might have been different last year. But I think the question is going to be, how can Xaverian mix up that offense a little bit? Because really the question with this team is, how many touchdowns are they actually going to give up this year? And it's not going to be that many.
Now the Division I race is going to be a lot more interesting this year. Name one team that's going to surprise.
Yeah, I think in the North you're looking at an Everett, a Central Catholic. You're looking at Lowell and some of the freak athletes they have coming back. But keep an eye on St. John's Prep. Obviously Jake Burt, the Boston College commit tight end there, is going to be a factor. They've got a turnover here. With a new coach, Jim O'Leary stepping down in the offseason, kind of did it quietly, didn't have much hullabaloo around it. Turned the reins over to Brian St. Pierre, a guy who's won bowl games in college, a guy who's won games as an NFL starter, a guy who's been to Super Bowls. Anytime you promote that guy to head coach, I think you see the way that he developed the quarterback, Mike Gieslin, as the season went last year. They're going to find athletes in that school, and Brian St. Pierre is going to develop some players. I think they're going to be an impact. I think they're going to surprise some teams.
I'm looking at the South. Obviously, you're going to have, Bridgewater, Raynham, and Attleboro again. I think will be, a pretty strong side there. But I'm looking at Brockton, coming off a 5-6 season last year, missed out on the playoffs there with that, the way the Big Three works out there. This is a team that, we've talked about it in the offseason, Brendan. this offensive line is going to be among the biggest in the state. Obviously, one kid I like to look at, Uzziah Hilliard, is kind of, an underrated lineman there. Obviously, with Aaron Montero, Division I prospect there, but with Brockton, you're always going to get a tough, black and blue kind of football team, and I think this team really fits that mold. And I think they could be. I don't want to say you want to sneak up on people because Brockton know who Brockton is, but I think this is going to be a statement season for them.
Now the Division IV field is going to be a lot deeper than usual. Who should we be keeping our eye on?
Yeah, the team I'm really high on is Shepherd Hill. We got to see them earlier this week, Scott, do a photo shoot, and boy, they look even bigger in person, I think. Obviously the big name there is Chris Lindstrom, the coach's son of an NFL veteran, by the way, and nephew of an 8-year Kansas City Chiefs veteran. So there's some lineage there, but he's 6'5", plays at about usually 240, 245, and you see some of the clips of him, beating out like skill players, running downfield, pulling blocks. He's so athletic for a guy to play at that weight and be the lightest player on that line potentially, between Cam McDonald, Austin Jones, and Chase Flibbert, fearsome foursome there. And then you factor in the quarterback, Drew John-Guillaume, true option quarterback. They run a double wing with some gun variations within that, but he's a throwback to you think back to the 90s of college football with guys like Tommy Frazier or Joe Hamilton, guys that were true dual threats, guys that were as tough to take down as they were at throwing the ball. You look at all those factors in, and this is a kid who runs a 10.8 100-meter dash. That's pretty good for a high school track and field athlete. So he's got some wheels. This is going to be a dangerous team, and many out there feel that they are the best team in Central Mass going into the year.
I've got to say that this D4 race, again, is going to be one of the most intriguing across the state. Obviously, we saw it last year with Doherty and DUI. The game here was absolutely phenomenal. I think both of those teams are going to figure prominently again. Can't forget Wacona, obviously, out there. But I'm really looking at the South here with DUI and Holliston. Obviously, I think for Holliston, if they didn't have Westwood last year, that would have been a team that might have been playing here. I think this is their year in the TVL. With Zach Elkinson, I think was really one of the biggest breakout performers last year, and he really fits that mold of what Holliston, their mentality offensively. They never let off the pedal. Obviously, the blood tempo, and Todd Kiley's obviously one of the more intriguing game planners across the state, and he really fits that mold. And I look for Holliston to be back here in Gillette.
How about a team that nobody's talking about that's going to make a splash?
What I'm looking at, Kelly, is Cambridge. You look at the momentum they had, the way they finished up last year, that playoff game against Reading. It went down to the wire, came up short. For a long time, I think we've all felt this is City Lake Cambridge is a powder keg with the right coach taking it in the right direction. Certainly, Ryan Solnier, I think, has that program going in the right direction after some great success in his first year. You look at the athletes, you look at the offense they run, that spread offense. You look at a quarterback in Marcus Collins, who's pretty good at throwing the ball. And also, they're in a new league this year, the Dual County League, which, unlike the GBL, is up for grabs in most years between Acton, Boxborough, Lincoln, Sudbury, and Westford Academy. And this team can hang with those guys. I think they're going to be one to watch out for this year. They could make some noise in Division II.
Looking at a couple teams on the South Shore, in particular, Braintree. Randolph is a team that I'm hearing a lot about in the preseason here. They get a really great, dedicated coach there that's been 3 years kind of getting that program back in the right direction, in the right winning mentality. And then, of course, Quincy is the team that I think is going to be my Lowell this year. As I took Lowell all the way to the championship game last year almost, but I'm looking at Quincy this year, coming off an impressive 7-4 season last year. Patriot Keenan, the question I think is there, can Duxbury continue, as we've seen for them really in the better part of the last decade, to just be able to run through that division year after year after year with relatively little competition there. I think this might be the year that the Presidents make a real statement.
Now, with our Mr. Football race, typically offensive players dominate the field. But at the start of this season, we might be looking at defensive players. Who are your top picks?
I think first thing you're going to look at Joe Gaziano from Zavarian, but a guy I want to pay attention to is Davon Jones over at St. John's of Shrewsbury. This is a guy who's playing 15 yards off the ball on most plays at free safety, and yet he had 125 tackles last year to go along with 8 picks. This is a guy who is as much a force in the run game as he is in the passing game. And obviously, it's going to be interesting where he fits on the offensive side of the ball. Did they keep him at X receiver, where he was such a big play threat at times last year and high points the ball like few players I've seen in my time here at ESPN Boston? Or do you move him to running back? Do you move him to the other side of the formation, maybe the Y or the Z? There's a lot of things you can do with that guy. That's going to be one of the interesting subplots to start the year. But certainly an athlete wherever you put him, and the numbers speak for themselves. Lucas Dennis from Everett is another one I'm looking at. Everett is a kind of a, it's almost like a AAA system for Boston College defensive backs at this point. I mean, I think 4 in the last 8 years, and this kid for good reason. I mean, this is a kid who was originally slated to replace Jonathan DiBiaso at quarterback in 2012, and then had some injuries, came on late in the season. Last year, came into his own, I think, as a corner, and kind of roaming the secondary there, and also made some dynamic plays on offense. That's the other one interesting. Where do they put him on offense? But certainly he's going to be a guy that's count on a lot, as opposed to years past. Another one I want to look at is Michael Dunn from down south in Dennis Yarmouth, who Scott mentioned just a minute ago. When you think of Swiss Army knives, you think of this guy. He's played every position on the field, every skill position on the field. And aside from that, one of the best man-to-man coverage cornerbacks. You saw it in the Super Bowl last year. The way he matched up with Alfred Adarkwa. You saw it in the D4 South Final, the way he matched up with Zach Elkinson. This is a guy who takes a lot of pride in that. His cousin, Matt Montalto, was an All-State quarterback for us in 2011. Dynamic player.
Again, I think it starts with Gaziano, really, that conversation. Our reigning defensive player of the year goes without saying. I think if Troy Flutie didn't have a record-breaking season as he did last year. I think we're talking about perhaps a repeat performance here. But I can't forget Shai Cullen up in Lowell, obviously a Syracuse commit there. That whole defense, again, is going to be stacked. Nicolau Corey, I mean, that linebacking core, I'd put them out there with anybody in the state. I think Lowell is going to figure prominently, and Shai is going to be a big reason why. I want to go back to Zach Elkinson, too. Again, I think this D4 theme is going to start coming up again. I think he's one of the more dynamic athletes that I saw last year. And speaking of which, against playing in that game against Mike down in the South Final, could see that again, obviously. And those two players lining up against each other would be a real treat for everybody. And if you want to throw in a long shot there, maybe look at Mike Magapinto out in East Longmeadow. I mean, put up absolute crazy video game numbers last year, and I would expect pretty much the same from him this year.
Now, when it comes to running backs, there's always a loaded crop. And going into this year, there's definitely a unique set of skills.
Yeah. As Scott just mentioned a minute ago, Mike Magapinto, this is a kid who's 5'5", and really kind of quietly close to the 2,000-yard mark. Obviously, he was a stud out there. I don't think he gets enough recognition out here, but there's a guy between him and Christian Carr from Plymouth North, who's about equal height and also set the school single-season rushing record last year for Plymouth North. You're looking at potential like year of the. I don't want to say anything derogatory, but like year of the small running back, year of the low to the ground kind of scat back. Both these kids, they're going to put up big numbers again. And I also say it's going to be an interesting crop for the elusive backs. Two of the most elusive, I think, are Wright in Worcester County there. Mark Wright from Auburn put on a human's workload and has the numbers to show for 260 carries, over 2,100 rushing yards, led Central Mass in rushing touchdowns, 25 yards. Auburn always has a big line, but I mean, might be the most dynamic threat since Fred Taylor back in 2011. And Jakari Carpenter from Doherty. I mean, we all saw it, Scott, with the playoff run that Doherty won on last year. Every week, Jakari Carpenter was making some sort of run where he just made everybody miss. It was like watching a SportsCenter highlight reel at times. I mean, it was like watching Frogger, almost. Just the runs that you have. And you got to figure he'll be a factor. And he only had 9 rushing touchdowns, believe it or not, last year, but 1,500 rushing yards. And they're going to have an interesting, they might have a thunder and lightning combination there this year. That might work to his benefit, the change of pace. So I think for those type of players, it's going to be a potential for big gains. So.
I always love my lacrosse turnover guys, and Brooks Tyrell is going to be at the top of this list, obviously. Kind of a bigger, more imposing back, 6'1", 200 pounds. Obviously, without saying a great athlete, he's a Division I lacrosse commit. Could have the potential, I think, to play college football at a pretty high level too. But great athlete no matter what. And then two guys that I think kind of had, somewhat of a breakout season last year. Look at Damon Bellin at Attleboro. It was the Tim Walsh show there last year, but Damon in a lot of those games, particularly in their Hockomock League schedule, had some really big games. In particular, I'm thinking about the King Philip game where he had some really nice, tough fourth quarter running that you want to see from a kid that's going to be a rising senior. And I think the ball will be more in his hands this year, so it's going to be a big season for him. And then another kid in that, I think, somewhat in that situation was Steve Kukwa at Walpole last year. I think perhaps maybe not quite the season that the Rebels were hoping for last year with a lot of hype coming into that, but Steve Kukwa really from week 1 against Foxborough made a statement. I remember coming away from that game being like, this kid's going to be somebody that can play as a sophomore. And obviously, in tradition-rich town like Walpole, they have plenty of options to go to. So, to go with a sophomore that early in the season really showed me something. And think back to that Natick game last year, that crazy back and forth, 100-plus points on the board. He was a big part of that, and look for big things from him.
Don't forget, too, Lovey Salvant will be joining in the backfield there. Another track star. Having that combination, both juniors, I think Bill O'Connell's going to have fun on offense, come up with plays for them. So.
Now, to kick off our 5th year of coverage, we'll be unveiling our all-time All-State team. Be sure to join our conversation on Twitter for that. But in the meantime, who would be your all-time pick for Mr. Football?
Yeah, I think it's almost too easy to pick Harry Aganis. You think of the run at Lynn Classical right there, national title, turned down a gig with the Cleveland Browns to play center field for the Red Sox. I mean, everything speaks for itself. His name's everywhere on the North Shore, BU, obviously. I almost wonder if you look at some kids from Brockton and an unprecedented run that will never be seen again in the state of Massachusetts. With the 1980s with Brockton High School under Armand Colombo, ranked in the USA Today final poll nationally 5 times in the 80s, including 1988 when they were #1 in the country before Leominster upset them, one of the biggest upsets ever. Really, just a special time in high school football in this area. And also with that time, you look at Natick with the Fluties, too. I think it had to be in the conversation as well. As you go back a little bit ways to some of the Springfield area talent from way back in the day, Nick Bonaconti, Angelo Bertelli. This is a fascinating conversation I look forward to having as the season draws near.
You just mentioned it, Brian. I don't think, talk about an easy choice in Harry Gannis, and I think everybody of that generation would probably trend in that direction. Obviously, I think if you're talking about an all-around athlete that to ever come out of Massachusetts area is absolutely at the top of that list. But I don't know how you can go anywhere here but Doug Flutie. Heisman Trophy winner. I think probably, no disrespect to a Nick Bonaconti, Football Hall of Famer, people of that ilk, but I don't think anybody in the history of Massachusetts football has really brought Massachusetts football to the highlight and to the national attention as Doug Flutie did in his days in high school, but obviously going on from there at Boston College. But I don't think anybody has ever really elevated this state to that kind of national consciousness as Doug Flutie did. So that would be my choice.
Well, that'll wrap up this preview. As always, be sure to join us on ESPN Boston High Schools for all your high school updates. For Brendan Hall and Scott Barboza, I'm Kelly Emerson.